So, all right, so we're live now. So, all right, everybody, welcome. So, we promised a discussion about. We're live on both Twitter and on YouTube, so we actually should be streaming to both channels or both platforms. But the only way I can see your questions live is if they are sent through YouTube. So if you want to ask a question live of anybody here, just go to YouTube and type it in. I will try to catch them on Twitter, but I don't guarantee it. But they show up in my little computer screen right there if you do it on YouTube. So we wanted to take a minute to talk about Tieflings and Kender and the argument about why they shouldn't be used or should no longer exist or should be disbanded from every game ever. And one of the things I did was I went through and ran a couple of I asked a question. This was kind of what spawned it. I basically said, what is it everybody has against Tieflings anyway? Because I don't really have anything against them personally. 250,000 impressions later and hundreds of responses. I was like, okay, then apparently a lot of people do have problems with Tieflings. So I ran a poll because then I asked about Kender and I was like, okay, let's really step in it now and ask about Kender. So I ran a poll about which would you rather not have in your campaign, which would you rather have in your campaign, the Kender or a Tiefling? And it's running 51-49 with 400 plus votes. That's so people are really just like, I don't want either. They're bad. They're terrible. But I think a lot of the comments came from people who were playing as long as I've been. I've been around since about 82. Off and on. I can't say I've always been an avid player, but Richard, you've worked at Dungeons at Wizards of the Coast, on Dungeons and Dragons. This Effin GM, you've game mastered it, and I thought I was a Dragonlance fan until I started following Yodano, and now I'm really kind of consider myself junior varsity by comparison. But someday we'll get together and have beer and discuss it. But I will take hats off on the Dragonlance fandom. So who else better to talk about Kender than a Dragonlance fan? So I think between this group, maybe we can say, hey, look, maybe there's some good things about these things. Maybe there's a way to play them. Maybe there's a way to DM them that people haven't necessarily thought of that might make the experience better. And I wanted to kick it off with something I saw Margaret Weiss and Yodano. I think you were on this chain, but it goes back like a year. And she actually popped up on Twitter one day when we were talking about Kender, and there was a whole bunch of people yelling about different things. And she's like, look, the way I play him is pretty simple. I tell the game master or tell the dungeon master and to take one thing from every person and put it in my pack, but don't tell me or the player what it is. And I think that's like the most genius way to play a Kender. They shouldn't just be kleptomaniacs. They should just be forgetful. And I was like, who better to really answer that question than her? Because she kind of came up with it, right? But that personally to me seems like a really good way to play those. And as a GM or a dungeon master, however you want to say it, I haven't dungeon mastered in years, but I'm going to start doing it again for my kids. I kind of do for my kids, but I'm going to be doing a lot more of it as I kind of take a step back from my career because I don't really want to work that hard anymore. To me, that's an interesting way to GM it. So if you have a player that wants to just come up and be a kleptomaniac, I think you have to kind of take them aside and say, look, it's kind of not the point to the Kender race. The Kender race is just childlike and wondrous. I mean, like, Richard, we were talking earlier about, hey, if one gets its arm bit off, the Kender probably like, oh, cool. Check that out. Yeah. So what do you guys think? I'll leave it to you guys now. I'll be quiet for a minute. So Richard, what's your experience with Kender? I mean, positive or negative, love or hate?
Well, they're like I said earlier, I posted a thing that basically was sort of saying like the one sort of conversation or debate that's really doesn't go anywhere is sort of like I like it, I don't like it, or like a preference or taste kind of thing. So to your point of like, I would say when you introduce something like the Kender, if you're DMing, you have to know some of the challenges that come with it. So their two main traits would be like kleptomania and lack of fear. So the DM really has to do some thinking and some work to be like, kleptomania can, especially in your own party members, can really cause a lot of chaos. The random, like I find something that I stole from another party member in my bag. Sounds interesting, but I don't know how long that goes. Like, is it game 10 where that becomes sort of old? And the sort of lack of fear thing is like how do I like do I have to keep DMing this so you don't die? Because because they aren't necessarily that tough either. So to me, that would be like there's a lot. It's like when you say like, okay, well, we'll put a Kender race in. That's cool, but the DM has to then has different challenges to face with it. And like I said, in the end, if you have fun with that, great. If somebody said like these are really complicated, they're going to complicate the whole game, and then a bunch of my energy goes to that instead of like other parts of the game, I could see that too.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So,
I think
hey,
one of the, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I think one of the other things to keep in mind is that when you're seeing Kender in a campaign, it's usually during their wanderlust era. So the average Kender lives, I think, like 100 years. You know, they hit wanderlust in their 20s, early 20s, so they're young. And it's just insane curiosity, and it's not. I mean, yeah, a party member's possessions might get misplaced once in a while, but it's also I mean, I don't like the term kleptomaniac just because it's more of a, at least how I see it, I think it's a curiosity. They're not going to fixate on party members per se. They're going to fixate on the shiny baubles. It's what grabs their attention. I think there was an article about Kender that Richard Moore did back in Dragon Magazine, where he talks about if a Kender was in a room with 100 gold pieces and one really shiny piece of glass, he's gonna walk out with that shiny piece of glass 9 times out of 10. It's just like, ooh, neat.
It's actually in Dragonlance Adventures. 9,000 steel pieces versus a big shiny piece of glass. They make that exact reference right in there.
Yeah,
that one right there.
Nice.
Yeah, that one right there. Yeah.
And
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just got very excited.
That's fine. And I don't know where I was trying to figure out where I was going. Oh, and Margaret, you were talking about when Margaret Weiss, yeah, she chimed in again the other time. I mean, it seems like maybe once a year, once every other year, people like to get on the Kender bashing train. And I think she said something about it's not my fault that the people don't know how to play them. And Richard brought up a really good point of how extreme it can be. I think I've found out, I've introduced them a couple times, but if you're with a group of people who don't know Dragonlance, don't know Kender, don't know Kryn, then yes, it's a recipe for a nightmare. So I've introduced them as NPCs, just so that the players have an idea of what this sometimes annoying little man is about, or woman. And that fearlessness, yeah, that's going to get. I mean, they're going to get the party in trouble. That's going to happen. They get into the trouble, and then they have a tendency to rely on others to get them out of it. That's going to take ingenuity on the DM side as well as the players. I don't know. I've never seen when we have the topics on D&D Twitter, there's usually a split down the road of either one extreme opinion or the other, but there's not many Kender defenders out there anymore. There's a few.
You did introduce me to something that I will admit I had never seen before you threw it up on Twitter one day, and that was this guy right here, the Kender vampire, which
no joke.
I would contend is probably one of the scariest freaking things I could ever possibly envision. So yeah, I mean he can do all kinds of interesting damage to you. It's not even funny.
The era of no save either. You get hit, you lose a wisdom point and Constitution point? No, wisdom.
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to imagine like tossing that out as a game master onto the table and be like how do you play the Kender vampire? What, like they just walk into the room and go like, look at all this shiny blood that's been left everywhere. Guess I'll take it all. You know? What a villain.
especially when there's a death knight right around the corner.
Look at this guy, am I right? Ugh, what a stick in the mud.
But the Death Knight and Kender working together. No, wait.
I had a thought because you just said Kender Defenders, and before I came on, like I started reading, like kind of refreshing myself, and before I was relatively neutral, but about an hour before the stream started, I am now solidly in the Kender Defender camp because my bold take is that I firmly believe not only is the Kender a viable choice for a party, it is the best choice for a party.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to hear why.
Okay. All right. So it's good. There's a train to follow here. So I've been a forever GM for 20 plus years, right? And I'm sure many of us are in that same boat. The things that bother me about when I play the game, the things that really rankle me are there's problematic player behaviors, but for the most part, people I play with are very good about not being jerks to others. But what I do find they do often is hesitate, or they overthink, or they avoid danger. And the Kender solves all of my problems in one species. Okay, they're fearless, right? So anytime someone's like, I don't know if I want to go in that room, there could be something beyond there. And I'm like, yeah, but what would a Kender do? It's like, I'm going to open that door. How many times have you sat at a table on the behind the Dungeon Master screen and watch players like debate for 20 minutes? Slight hyperbole. Debate for 20 minutes whether to open the door or not. Right? Like, should we go through that door? Should we? Well, we should check it for traps. Okay. Well, now we're going to listen through it. Okay. Well, now we're going to smell it. Now we're going to say, oh my gosh, just open the door. It's a broom closet. I know it's a broom closet. Open it. Right? And the Kender to do that. Right. And then that's part one is the fearlessness. It solves the problem. Number two, one of the most famous images of D&D is the great golden idol, right, with the great gemstone, right, and that the thief is like trying to pry out of it. I cannot remember who did that art piece. It's like the you know what I'm talking about, the big
the player's handbook, Big Demon. Dave Trampier.
Okay. Yeah. He has a great name, but too many letters added on to it, I say, because my last name is Tramp, and that's a fun joke. Anyway, so I think about that, and I think, when I think of D&D, I think, I look at that image, and I think, it's like let's dive into tombs and grab all this fantastic treasure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one. And my players, again, they shy away from it. Like, well, it might be trapped. I don't know. And instead of like checking the traps, they'll check. They won't find me, but they still get so scared to do it. Whereas you just look over at the Kender player, and you're like, it's shiny. It's to me the Kender player, the Kender species has the potential to be the DM's like right hand agent of chaos. Like, hey, something needs to happen. I need somebody that's not me to get this ball rolling, and everyone else is too afraid. And the Kender player has the opportunity and the drive to be that person, to be the person who kicks open the door, but rather than a barbarian, it's a 3 foot tall, effective, permanent 14-year-old going, boom, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's fair. I started reading this one today, Gates of Thorbarden. I'm kind of about halfway through.
Great book.
I started rereading Dragonlance last year and took a bit of a break, but I picked up where I left off, and that was where I left off. And I've read probably 60 of them over the years, but I'm sort of starting from Chronicles and working my way forward with my kids. But there's a Kender in it that picks up a magic item, and he's more curious about what the magic does because it's kind of stuck in there. And he's like, how do I get the magic out? How do I just let it free? It's like, it could be a fireball or meteor storm. He has no idea, but he just wants to let it out and get it free. Right. So I'm like, you're exactly right. That's exactly what they do. They're kind of like, what the hell? Let's see what happens.
Well, it's still
one of the most famous Kender is called Uncle Trap Springer.
Yeah. Uncle Trap.
Just the perfect name.
That to me is, like I said, one of the things, because you like having Kender in a game. If I was to run a Dragonlance game, I would definitely let you play Kender because that's part of the setting. But I also know I'd have to kind of figure it out, because even applying what you're saying there about they're kind of the agent of chaos for the DM, that's great. But also they're doing things like triggering that trap or opening that door or doing that thing. So if Kender are like the solution to that, you have to be careful that the player isn't rolling up a brand new solution every game because the last one died.
No. It takes. I'm 100% with you, Richard. It takes a good DM. Not only is it a good player to role play the Kender, and if they're going to go in with just that, I'm taking everything from my party members. That is a recipe for disaster. But
I think that's a lot of stuff we talk about too, where it's like, is this fun or is this not fun? But in some cases, it's like talking about some of those things and saying, here's maybe how you could handle it, can turn a thing that a lot of people think is not fun into fun. If you're like, hey, you got to think ahead about this, you got to figure that out. So that's sort of what you might call the negative side, is actually just saying, these are some of the things you got to look out for, balance out in the game. And if you do that, it'll actually be pretty fun.
But I think another thing about that makes it different is perspective. Like growing up, or at least like I know most of us here probably started playing D&D somewhere around the 80s, give or take some years, and it was more about, at least for my group, I can't speak for everybody else, it was more about the dungeon crawl and the people at the table and having a good time. And it's my personal experience with people that are more cutting their teeth on the 5e crowd. It's a lot of min-maxing. How much can I get out of this character? How many bonus actions do I have? And how, whereas we were more, one side of people adventuring is more about the adventure and the tale itself. And then the other is more about, efficiency, whether that's putting a generic statement on a blanket of people. I'm not sure, but I know that it's two different role-playing eras. So nowadays, with how D&D is viewed by the majority, I don't think the Kender have as much of a place. But for those of us like me still stuck on AD&D, sure. And it also makes me appreciate that my role-playing experiences, and I think I was talking with Richard about this earlier, is just that I've been blessed to have just people that wanted to have fun at the table, and we really haven't had any of my friends that would be the jerk that would come in with a Kender and just kick over a table and take everybody's stuff and call it a day. You know what I mean? But I've seen those people. Those people are out there, and that's fortunately.
Yeah, but as a DM, I would bet you that I would probably let the party destroy that Kender and have him for breakfast, right? So they might not live very long.
Sorry,
but I think what you guys kind of agree with my point is that I think Kender have value and Kender brings something, but it's a very particular player that has to do it and do it well. Otherwise, they just turn into thieves. But you can kind of make any race a thief. So it's like, if you're a thief and you want to be a kleptomaniac, great, go ahead. But you're not going to have people to play with very often.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was mentioning we had a player. I did a Dragonlance campaign back in college, and we did have a player play a Kender. And our solution was that we got buy-in from the rest of the players on it. Like before we sat down to play, I had them create we took a table of like 20 items, right? And there's the Kender, and there was 4 other people in the party. So every person in the party would added 5 items from their bag to the list, and these were the above board. We are okay, or at least mostly okay, if this ends up in your pocket, right? So whenever one of the players would go for one of the 5 items, and on their character sheet would be starred, we'd roll a percentile check, and if it hit, then the Kender had it at that time. Or if the Kender reached in their bag and said, like, to reach out something random, we'd roll the D20, and then that would be what they pulled out. Then we just cross items off the list if it couldn't make sense. But I find that Kender work great even now, as long as you just get the buy-in from everybody else at the table. You're like, hey, I'm going to be stealing your stuff, but we can, we can add to the fiction together rather than trying to, make it a combative or competitive sort of thing.
So
That's oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll
I was gonna
hold
say
my thought for a minute.
that's a big part to a lot of this. I think is when you talk to folks before the game, or you figure things out, you figure out what you're going to do, and typically it goes smooth. Because Dano was talking about playing back in the day, and I remember back in late '80s, early '90s, when we were just we're playing D&D and we're trying all this different stuff. That actually ran a game where it's everybody is evil. Right? So you could be chaotic evil, lawful evil, neutral evil, but everybody had to be evil. But we sort of had these ground rules where it's until you kind of get through the gauntlet of danger, you all kind of need each other. So you're not going to backstab each other. But then when it gets to a certain point, you might start, double crossing each other. And then it's almost like the game where it's who's going to survive in the end, who's going to be the last evil jerk to live. And we had actually kind of a fun game that way. And as long as you're sort of this is how it's going to run, you're probably okay. And you have sort of a plan of how it's going to work.
You reminded me of it's the idea with the evil campaign. There's a difference between chaotic evil and chaotic stupid, right?
Yes.
One we want in this game. The other one we would rather just see maybe at the bar for about 5 minutes and say hello before they put a lampshade on their head and start running around like an idiot.
Exactly. So one of the things I was going to say was I think you had it exactly right when you said you have to have that sort of fearlessness in the game. Because if you remember back to a particular series, let me see if I can get this done properly here. You'd think with all my years in the computer industry, I'd be able to do this. If you remember back to this series, like the Legend series, Tasselhoff saved the day about a dozen different times just by being like, hey, that's cool. And just kind of just going into it with no fear. Right. At one point I was sure he was the brains of the operation because it was him and Caramon, but that's beside the point. But that fearlessness and that sort of childish curiosity was either what gets him in a whole lot of trouble or what actually kind of saves the day. Right. There's just sort of nothing in between. And I think that's an interesting way to play it, where you've got somebody who's like, let's just open the door, let's just go ahead and do it. Right. I think you'd have to kind of almost sit the player down who wants to do it and go, okay, I'll let you play a Kender, but here's the rules, right? You have to play it as, Kender were intended, because if you go back to sort of the birth of Kender, which was Dragonlance Chronicles, which pretty much everybody in at least the age bracket we're in is going to play. I can't speak to 5e or whatever, 5.5e or 6e or whatever the hell the new one's called. Maybe not, but Kender are kind of like the comic relief for the group in a lot of ways, which I think can be kind of good because sometimes things get a little too serious, but Kender kind of break up that seriousness.
Are you saying that there's seriousness in a game in a world in which the entire place is ravaged by war? That's crazy.
I know, right? Nuts. I know, right?
I won't give away any spoilers, but the whole new Dragonlance trilogy. No, I'm not going to give anything away, but if it weren't for Vertaz, we probably wouldn't be reading that trilogy. I mean, he's the central character around it, and it's also it's another great GM's tool of how you can Taz in a time machine. You can do so much. So much
go wrong. Seriously. I did like the way that even in that series they said that well, how come he went back? You're only supposed to be able to send one thing back at a time. It's like, well, they weren't really supposed to exist anyway. Kender were kind of a mistake, right? So it was like, what the hell? Let's send one back in time.
And and I was going through my list of Dragonlance books when somebody was talking about, I can't remember who, but along with the Kender hate comes the Dragonlance hate. So I was looking through the books and I was adding it up. I think we're up to, what did I say, 221 books now, but I was looking at the cover art, Richard, and I think it's hard to say, but with all of the realms, Dragonlance may have been the most spoiled. I just had to throw that out there. It's when Tim brought up that the twins cover there, I'm like, man, Larry Elmore. Oh,
Oh.
that's great stuff, man.
Such a good cover.
Yeah, it was the heyday. It was the heyday of, you know what? We're just gonna. So TSR for a while. If I know everybody here knows this, but if you're watching and you don't know it, because one of the things I'm trying to do this year is search for people who don't currently play and bring them in, even if it's 5e or 6e or whatever. Because I've got teenage kids, and I guarantee you they're not going to play first edition. They want to play 5e or 6e because they think it's cooler. But the thing with those books is, yeah, there's hundreds of them, and I think it's interesting to get people to start to read them now, because I use Chronicles as a gateway drug to get my kids interested in the game, right?
Mhm.
So my older son, especially the 15-year-old, picked it up and he read it in like a weekend.
That's awesome.
And he got actually upset when, and no spoilers here for anybody here, Sturm got killed, right? He was visibly mad when Sturm
Oh, heart-wrenching.
Can I tell a funny, kind of a funny little anecdote real quick on that note? So Dragonlance is a gateway drug. It was my gateway drug. My dad had all the novels, but amusingly, my dad hated Dungeons and Dragons and very much kind of bought into some of the satanic panic stuff. But he didn't see that, he didn't know they were connected in any way, shape, or form. He just had these novels. So he got me into this, and then I get into Dungeons and Dragons and I see the connection. I'm like, Dad, look at this game I play all the time. They're the same thing. My dad's like, it's not, absolutely not. I'm like, oh, well, thanks for this anyway. Bye. He's since come around.
Marijuana leads to heroin.
Now, there's something because
Oh no!
Don't I know it?
It's like, no, you're going to play. No. The thing about, so the other thing that comes up is like, when we're talking Kender and Tiefling on Twitter or X, sorry, Elon, I can't call it X. I just can't bring myself to do it. It's Twitter. A lot of people were just, pure hating on Kender, pure hating on Tieflings because, well, the game changed, the game evolved, the game, it used to be this and that was fine. Why change it? Dungeons and Dragons evolved because Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson came out of the war playing world, where they were playing a lot war game playing world, like Avalon Hill games and other stuff, which I played a lot of when I was a kid with my dad. Avalon Hills, Third Reich, 1776, a few others. And they found those games to be very restrictive. So it was like, you could only do this, you can only do that. So they wanted a game that could you could do anything you want. It's wide open, have fun, make believe, enjoy yourself. And that's what they, I think, intended the game to do. And I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide whether or not I'm crazy. But I think bringing in Kender is just a way to kind of expand your imagination and be like, hey, let's have this one new option, right? Use it, don't use it, up to you, don't care. But it's an option out there for you, and it's cool, it's fun, or could be in the right setting.
So if you look in the OD&D books, the 3 little brown books, the first one, I believe, Men in Magic, towards the front, there's the section on character creation, and at the end, there's a little paragraph, and it says, you can play whatever you want, and then it even cites, if you want to be a dragon, you can play a red dragon. DMs need to come up with the rules around it and way to balance out the party, but it's there. And he put that, you're right, Tim, because they wanted to be anything, and they put that in there from day one. When people talk about later how, this isn't a playable race, or this isn't a playable race. We didn't have, at least my group, we didn't have playable and non-playable races. What do you want to be? Okay, we had ogres, we had people playing that because they want to be the big, strong guys.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing in I play World of Warcraft when I'm so being in the tech field and being the chief technology officer, whatever my title is. My official company title is chief wizarding officer, which really means chief technology officer. And the way I got the chief wizarding officer title was I was drinking wine with the CEO and chairman of the board one day, and he came up with this problem that was another really hard one. I was like, what do you want me to do? Just wave my magic wand and wizard you up a damn answer? He's like, well, you're always playing that game anyway. Why don't we just change your title to chief wizarding officer? So as a joke, I changed it over on LinkedIn, and like thousands of replies later, people are like, what the hell is this? This is pretty cool. It kind of stuck, right? So he went and changed my title officially on a bunch of paperwork to be chief wizarding officer. So I guess I'm a wizard now. And it's on paper. So that is my job.
Well, I think of it I was thinking of it earlier today, and I was thinking of sort of like hard rules versus soft rules. Mm-hmm. So like for me, hard rules would be like the math, rolling the dice, things like that. So those are things that you put down, you kind of quantify. Soft rules might be things like, even the alignment system itself. Like there's no real math involved. It's just sort of like an idea of how you play your character, or a paladin needs to be lawful good, or this or that. So there's a lot of kind of soft rules. But I think the biggest soft rules you have, or the biggest collections, if you're going to play Call of Cthulhu, you're kind of like, well, this isn't really a game where you fight the monsters. It's more of a game where you investigate. A lot of times you sneak around, you're looking at stuff, you get spooked out, and you might die or go insane, right? So that's the principle of the game. D&D has sort of a different thing to it. Like we're probably going to fight monsters and do this and that. I think in recent years, D&D has different venues. Some people like telling stories more. Some people like old school dungeon crawls. Some people like all this stuff. So we have one game that actually can cater to a bunch of different things. And that means, to me, it's like everybody can be happy and you can do whatever you want. But it's probably really important at the beginning of the game to say, this game is, a dungeon crawler, or this is a meat grinder, or this is mostly a story game, right? You know what I'm talking about, meat grinder, right? It's like, get a piece of loose leaf and don't.
Yeah. See, I think I agree with you, but then every once in a while, like this one by Gary and David Sutherland, it's a meat grinder, but if you don't actually take your time and kind of think through the problems, I don't care if you're a level 10 or level 14, you're not walking out of that dungeon.
Yes.
Right. So you actually have to think through the way you approach things in some of these things without regard to how overpowered you are or whatever, because that thing's just that's just mean.
Well, that's what I mean. If someone was very used to, like, let's say modern 5e, which a lot of people say is more forgiving, let's say, or whatever, when you have it, or you have more hit points and stuff, and you just said, I'm running this module, and you don't give them a heads up that, like, this is brutal and you better think, right? You better be on your toes. Then they're not going to have fun. So it doesn't mean that that's a bad game. It just means up front, it's like, here's how we do it. And I think the same goes for the Kender and all the other stuff. It's just sort of like, yeah, if you clarify, it's probably okay.
I saw the difference firsthand when I ran a group of friends that had come up on 4E and 5E, and they wanted to do Tomb of Horrors. And I said, that's great. I'm like, just so you know, make like 3 or 4 characters. There's a really good chance you're going to need more than one. And they, when we started getting together and my backstory is this. I'm like, I don't care. This is just a one shot only. We're going to go. I'm going to be around that long. Well, and I swear I'm not making this up. The guy in the front lead, jumped into the sphere of annihilation, and they all followed. Mortified, and they were like looking at me for what happens next, and I'm like, you're all dead.
Ashes, y'all
and they
fall
quit,
down.
and they quit and left, and it was just such a different mindset for me. I'm like, they're actually like pissed. Whereas I mean, I had so many characters die before I even knew what second level was, but it was just
So that Dana, you just did something that
when they were going through, one of the biggest things I saw was that it was more about my abilities have this. Like I said, this is all traps and riddles, so you need to really think outside the box with it. And when they set off their first trap, there was a big argument because, well, my passive perception is this, and I'm like, well, your passive perception isn't a radar that's always going off. You have to tell me I'm looking for traps. I got my eyes on the floor. You know what I mean? Like it was less about the role playing having to come up with it. It was more about, this is what my stat says, so give it to me.
So on that, I want to kind of toss something in there because I think about this a lot. I think part of what leads into the idea that that players, like modern players, like can't handle death very much. I think what's often ignored is old school D&D. How long does it take you to make a character? Right, like 5 minutes. Right, roll, grab your 2 abilities that you get, move on. Maybe if you're a spellcaster, you'll pick a couple of spells. But in games that we have now, like 5th edition is a more simplified, is much much more simplified than say 4th edition was, or 3rd edition with their ridiculous amount of feats. But it still takes a while to make a character, And I think one thing that sort of leads into this mindset of 5th edition players don't like their characters dying is because it's an investment just putting the stuff on the character sheet. You're not going to be out of the game for 5 minutes and back in. You're going to be out of the game for 30 minutes just trying to pour through these books, trying to write down how all these abilities work. Which, to your credit, you said make sure you had these characters built in advance, but good Lord, that's like an hour and a half, right, of game prep before you even walk into a one-shot.
That's why we got pre-gens.
No, right. No, I agree. But then you have all this to read, right? Because even a level 1 character, right? A level 1 fighter has, your second wind, your weapon mastery traits now, your skills, there's so much.
Yeah,
no, I agree.
That gets into it though. So then you get into again, there's nothing wrong with any way that you're going to play or however you have fun. There's no argument there. But if you have that and it's sort of like killing a character is super inconvenient and could actually sort of mess up your game, then it's like, okay, you're kind of incentivized to not. So you're like, okay, so then that type of game, it would be really hard to say, okay, I'm going to simulate a Dark Souls game in that edition because Dark Souls is really unforgiving and brutal. So you might say, oh, if I was going to do a Dark Souls simulation, I might use like AD&D because it's really nasty. And it doesn't matter because when I say I play Skyrim and I also enjoy Dark Souls, nobody gets all upset. It's just like different modes of play. And to me, that's all it is. Yeah.
I actually am upset by that, but
so I
want to take Doug too.
People get upset with people about
I actually have a Dig Dug machine here at home.
Awesome.
It's the most favorite one to play.
With tieflings, we get used to I think that comes around where you have one set of players is used to seeing this person. This is the bad guy,
Yeah.
Whereas now they're trying to people playing tieflings as happy, lawful good characters, and it's just for people that have played through the realms and played the styles a certain way, it's just kind of breaks their brain a little bit, but it's generational, it's new people seeing the game in a new way. That's all. Like the whole, what was the orcs, that whole controversy where they're painting them all in a bunch of happy-go-lucky guys in a camp where for most of us that's a one hit die, hack and slash next.
I think I wanted to shift to tieflings, but before we completely shift over, I have one thing I want to say. Dana, you nailed it on one thing about the backstory. And all the love and hate about the Dungeons and Dragons movie, I got to admit, them trying to slide backstory in at the beginning and having that one guy go, enough backstory, who hasn't done that at a table? You're like, okay, enough. Really.
So we used to say 3rd level. That's when you get that's your backstory. By the time you reach,
you've earned it now.
Right.
That reminds me of that Brothers in Arms Dragonlance book where the red robe is talking to Raceland, and Raceland tries to introduce himself. It's like, I don't want to know your name. You don't get a name until you survive like 3 battles. Then we can talk.
Right?
Oh yeah, Brothers in Arms. Great Daniel Horn wraparound cover on that.
Yeah,
too.
Daniel Horn's awesome. Dano, I'll draw you a Tasselhoff and send it to you.
Yay. Thank you.
He is the Dungeons and Dragons art guy, like
just
the end all art guy.
Just to show that I don't hate Kender.
Come off this hating him.
All right. So the other group, the thing that spawned this whole thing, I want to do Kender first because I think it was more fun. I think they're more fun. Tieflings. It seems to be almost. I think it's also generational, but I want to get you guys' take on tieflings because there's people that absolutely despise them and there's people that absolutely love them. And I think I have figured out the difference after looking at hundreds of comments over the last couple of days between stuff that left on my account and others that were discussing tieflings. I think people that grew up on 1st and 2nd edition despise tieflings, and people that came in during 5th edition are like, hey, they're kind of cool. Right. So I think it's almost when you started playing.
Where does that leave me? I came up in 3rd edition.
Oh, you're screwed. Then. You
Oh.
just have no
Yeah, I
idea.
know.
You can-
I'm the forgotten. I
You
tell
can
people
log
all the
off.
time,
You can't do it anymore. You're done. You're out. You're out. No.
I tell people all the time I'm of the forgotten generation of D&D players. Like, you're either old school or you're new school. And then meanwhile, I'm over here like, well, back in 3.5, they had this. It's like, what are you talking about, you weirdo? Like,
That's cool that everybody can get mad and argue with you.
So here's something I also want to point out before we start talking about as we talk about tieflings. I'd like to kind of incorporate this in the conversation. I was out at a bookstore today. There's this company called Half Price Books. If you're from parts of the United States, Half Price Books are everywhere, right?
I've got 5 in a 5-mile radius. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got the flagship store here in Dallas is the big one, like the biggest one they've got. And I live close enough to that one. I go to it about twice a month. And raid them for everything they have. But I was talking to this, I was looking at their Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and this one mom was looking for something for her son, and I'm like, okay, that's really the newer stuff. This is older. Let me send you to the right place. But the thing I got was I was talking to the mom and the kid. The kid was 12 or 13. And basically they said, yeah, but we see all this stuff online. It looks like it's going to be really hard because people are debating the nuances of different rules. And I think part of the problem with the online discussion, and one of the things I'm going to try to focus on in the coming year, is that if we do deep dive rule lawyering about one for one time versus that time, it's driving new people potentially away, because newer generations like my kids who are in their teens, they don't go to Google to find stuff out. They go to TikTok or they go to Instagram or wherever. And if it's constantly a fight and constantly a discussion about one for one times right, no, it's this version, no, it's that, it drives people out. Right. So we need to kind of get into this. Okay, here's really how it's played. And a lot of that stuff kind of just falls by the wayside and sounds far more complex than it really is when you start having these discussions. So I want to kind of bring these things to a level that kind of sounds more appealing in a lot of ways. And that's why I wanted to get to this Kender Tiefling debate, because I think Kender are cool. I like them. A lot of people want to burn me at the stake for that, kind of like they want to burn the Kender at the stake. I don't care. Kender saved Kryn, and that's all that matters. Because without Tasselhoff, Kryn wouldn't exist, and I love Dragonlance. So there we go. Now Tiefling, on the other hand, is a group I've seen them at tables. I have no issue with them, and I don't understand the hate. So since you guys have game mastered far more often than I have, and I was out of the hobby for a number of years, and I'm now deeply back in, or becoming more back in, I'd love to hear you guys' take on Tieflings, both good and bad, indifferent, whatever. But we'll start with Richard, because you used to work for the company, so I'm sure you've seen the biggest complaints in the hate mail that comes.
Well, to me, again, it's like, it's how you set it up. So I think a lot of people would assume, like, when you have your general fantasy, like if I was to take a lot of fantasy settings, if someone looks like they have a diabolical bloodline, like whether it's demon or devil or whatever, then you would expect the regular folk in the world to be like, or like, not trust them and things like that. So there's sort of that aspect. And also a thing I mentioned as well is it's kind of very specific, whereas like a lot of the other ones are sort of like, you're of this race or species or culture or whatever you want to call it, and it's pretty broad. And beneath that, you have all kinds of different stories of like, you might have been this or that or that, and this is very specific, like you're of this lineage. And typically that kind of thing you would see is like, what's interesting about it is that it's kind of rare. So it's like 1 in a million that you're one of these and things like that. So in setting up your game, you're either kind of like, do you kind of do it where it's like, okay, tieflings are very rare. So, maybe only I'll let a tiefling in the game, but maybe only one, or let's talk about it and see, or maybe there's 3, but they all came from like their same sort of origin or something. They have like an origin spot. So it's sort of like, if that's the sort of world you want, you still want them to be like sort of like, they're devils, that kind of thing. If the world is sort of like, they just treat them like any other people, then that can get a little weird again for DM stuff. Because if a tiefling can walk into a bar and say, hey, can I have a beer? And the bartender's just like, yeah, sure, I'll get you a beer. Then that also means like Despater can walk into the bar and say, hey, can I have a beer? And they'll be like, yeah, I'll get you a beer. So it gets kind of, you start it's a little weird to be like, okay, what are we imagining here again? Like, does it kind of make sense? Is my suspension of disbelief blown in any way? But again, all this stuff to me is like, you talk about it beforehand, because you can play D&D, Call of Cthulhu, or that Toon game, where you kind of play cartoon characters, and it's all about saying, here's sort of the thing we're setting up. Here's what we're going to pretend. Here's the sort of world we're living in. So, yeah. So to me, it's like none of it is not doable. It's just sort of like, to me, doing it right. It's good to look at it and say, like, how are cool ways that we could handle this?
I think I my first introduction to tieflings was in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting book for 3.5. Fantastic. Was it? Yeah, it was there. And one of my favorite parts about the tiefling race, our species, was that they really emphasize that that there's something off about your character, and you get to choose, like, what is the thing that's off about you, right? And I think one of the things that made me really sad about 4th edition and 5th edition when it came to tieflings was that they homogenized them. It made, the in-world explanation in Forgotten Realms was, Asmodeus waved his rod and said, "Now you all look like me." But I think what they did by doing that was, one, took away a major part of their identity that's been around since Planescape, which is, this is your opportunity to play a character that has something really unsettling. Like, whatever you view player as unsettling, this is what your player has. And now we've given them the traits that a lot of other species have, right? Hey, you got a horns in the tail. Cool, you're a dragonborn. Nope, you're a tiefling, right? It's, which I don't have a problem if you want your tiefling to look like that at all, like the trait. But when we removed that aspect, I believe that we also removed kind of what you're saying. If you tell your player, choose an unnerving thing about your character, then they would have buy-in to when people reacted to that unnerving aspect, right?
Yep.
And with that removal of it, then now we have to explain, yeah, you're this tiefling, and people are going to react to you weird, but now we don't know why, right? Other than just because the book says it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. If I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, cool. All right, it made sense. Not bye.
No, I think you guys hit it. Is that they should be rare and they're not. They're becoming very common.
Yeah, Richard really nailed it with when he said, suspension of disbelief, and I think that's, if you got to talk about it beforehand, you're going with it, and it's what happens with a lot of those, tieflings. Like you said, 1 in a million. Most of them are really bad, so it's something you have to be prepared for.
So one of my favorite complaints I saw on Twitter, and I can't remember who did it, and I'd have to go back through 300 comments now to find it, but was somebody said, "Oh, so they're always played by some really angsty, brooding character." I'm like, you just described Tannis, because everybody loves Tannis Half-Elven, and you just spent a whole tweet describing freaking Tannis, and everybody loves the guy, right? So, like, okay.
I came on that conversation mentioning, like, that it's a half-elf problem, right? Or it's the half-elf ideal. Every fantasy series has this. The great hero who has a foot in 2 separate worlds. We've got Tannis Half-Elven.
No, I was just going to say, this is something that gets me so mad now. We can play anything else, but you're going to tell me that we can't have half elves in D&D anymore?
Exactly.
Get out of here. Get out. Telling me how to run my table. Get out.
I have a different comment to make on that. But the
sorry, that just so mad when they told me that. I'm like, you just tried to write Tannis out of existence.
Well, I kind of feel like
here's my take. If it exists in any edition and it's fun at the table, I don't care. I don't care if it's in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th. If you want to do it and we can figure out how to make it work, who gives a shit? Do it. I don't. The only thing I might kind of be upset about is a half Kender, half dwarf. That might be a little bit odd, but outside of that,
that exists. That's in the statistic for that was in the 3.5 book, Age of Mortals.
Was it really?
Template.
Oh my god!
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. Because Brothers in Arms had a half Kender.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they wrote 3.5 had a really had his stats out there for a half Kender? Oh,
Yeah, they did.
I am convinced. I am now convinced there are enough Dungeons and Dragons things written that I can throw anything out and it'll be done. Because one day on Twitter, and Dano, I think you were on this. I said, it would be really kind of funny to, roll this up and play it. I was talking about Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. I'm like, how would you play that as a D&D character? It had been done.
Yeah.
Paragon, and then either an Aarakocra or a, oh my gosh, Kenku, right? But the only phrase that he's ever heard was or whatever. No, that's not Daffy Duck. Sorry,
No, they took one. There's an old Dragon magazine where those crazy TSR folks statted out.
Oh, like legit?
Statted out Daffy Duck. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
RuneQuest had ducks.
Here he is. I actually bookmarked it. So here he is. This is Daffy Duck as a Dungeons and Dragons character. He has some interesting stats. He's chaotic neutral, which makes sense. Hit points are not applicable. He could take an unlimited amount of damage, and all that happens is he gets more annoyed the more damage he takes.
That's great. Well, my first character ever was Green Lantern, right? Like me trying to create Green Lantern through a sorcery. It's I get that. Like, okay, yeah, make stats for Daffy Duck. Why not?
So,
well, that's where it gets
Bugs Bunny and everything.
one thing to your point, Tim, where it's like I agree with your point, but then there's also like I said, that agreement amongst players. And sometimes that's a big thing too. Like all the players are kind of agreed into what you're doing, because you get that kind of thing like, oh, you can play or do whatever you want. And it's like, sure. But if everyone is, we're all going to rewatch or reread the Lord of the Rings, and then we're going to play like a Lord of the Rings game. And then somebody shows up with, I'm playing Daffy Duck. Right. Then you can kind of be like, and you're like, okay, well, it's maybe fun for them, but everybody else is like, I was really looking forward to sort of a cool Lord of the Rings, because we're all kind of getting into it. So it's that kind of thing, or the expectations of those types of things, which is why one of the things that I like that's come up a lot in recent years is like session 0. And I'm like, that's a perfect spot to sort of say, like, what are we thinking about here? What are we doing? Because like I said, if in an extreme example, if it was completely open, if you're just like, you can do whatever, and one player shows up expecting to play sort of Call of Cthulhu, one expects to play D&D, and one expects to play Toon, it's probably not going to be, it's going to be kind of jarring for everybody.
Nobody's going to like it. So
yeah,
you're exactly right. So like, I was reading this one because, there's a bunch of people complaining about stuff in that one. And I'm like, I'm going to read it just to see if there's anything in there to actually complain about.
Wash your hands when you're done, Tim.
You Air Force guys, I swear, us Army guys are impervious to germs, man. It takes a lot more than that to kill us. Sorry, a little interforce rivalry, and anybody who ever wants to talk to me about Marines, great. As soon as they put their crayons down, we'll have the discussion. Except most of them eat their crayons. Now,
it's in Navy equipment, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Wait, how did we just lose 50 viewers? What happened?
Well, the Marines don't know how to shut it off anyway. I actually looked at a 3-star Marine one time when after I got my PhD. I was doing some work I worked in the defense industry for a long time. I looked at a 3-star general Marine general who was giving me shit for being Army. And I was like, you know what Marine really stands for, right? And he goes, what? As muscles are required, intelligence not essential. I kind of forgot he was a 3-star. And I was pitching her. He looks at me and goes, and? I was like, well, shit, at least he knows. Anyway, you're exactly right. And it actually says, like, page 2 or something in the player's handbook. It's like, you can kind of do anything you want, but make sure everybody has fun. Right. So that's really the key, right? So I'm not going to show up to play Daffy Duck on a game where Bugs Bunny doesn't play. Right. Mm-hmm. Because without Bugs, Daffy has no point. So if you're playing a Lord of the Rings game and that's what everybody expects, you got to do that. If you're playing Call of Cthulhu you got to do that. If you're playing a game where a tiefling makes no sense, somebody has to have sort of the ability to say, okay, I want to play, but I'm not tied to my character. And I don't know too many people who are, my kids who are brand new are a different story, but anybody who's played for any length of time usually has 6 or 7 characters laying around, because that's the way it works, right?
Well, I think Colville, Colville did a whole video about this a while back, like how he there was a player in one of his games who wanted to play like a race class combo that just wouldn't work in his world. And one of the conclusions Colville came to on that, and I firmly agree, is while you don't have to give them 100% that, you can use that as a launching point to explore like what are you wanting to do with this, right? So like let's imagine for a second Lord of the Rings, right? You know, somebody wants to play an off the wall character who's comparative to the rest, like relatively anachronistic. Well, that's how you get Golem, right? That's where you get the Golem character. Is you have this one you work with that player, and then see if you can find that middle ground between their desire and your desire, the group's desire. And session zeros are great for that, right? To see if a middle ground, a common ground exists for that. I think like tieflings are great for like on one hand tieflings are half demons and half devils. They're not actually; those are cambions. They're 1/30th demons and 1/30th devils, but they can also represent a species of cursed people, right? Like maybe you're not a tiefling. You're not. We don't use the demons and devils in my game, but we certainly have dark magic. So who's to say that you weren't born underneath a bad sign, right? You weren't cursed at birth, or you carry a family legacy. Celeborn Lansbane from Forgotten Realms, he was cursed with lycanthropy, and that's a weird example to give. My point was curses, right? You can find a middle ground.
I've got the weirdest example that supports your point. I was running a game. I was running a game one night, and a friend of mine showed up, and he was sort of watching. He was doodling. And I was like, oh, what are you doodling? He's like, oh, this weird little potato-shaped guy. And I was like, okay, well, we're playing. Do you want to play? He's like, yeah, can I play the potato guy? And I'm like, okay, so they happened to be like in an alchemist's lab that they were going through this tower of an alchemist. And they literally like found his character in a jar, and then they opened it up and let him. But it's sort of like, yeah, if you can fit it in. But that to me is the other cool part. It's sort of like, like when I was working at Wizards or other companies, like the creative stuff doesn't hinge on whether it's right or wrong to do. It hinges on, can you kind of fit it in, right? And does it fit in? You all kind of go like, yeah, I could buy that, or that's cool. And that's all it is. If you can sell it, do it,
I mean, the whole game is nothing more than a conversation where some dice are involved, right? So why not have a conversation before that conversation?
I think I never really had to do. It was a long time before I had to do a session zero because I was playing with people I knew. So we kind of did that without realizing we did it. It wasn't until I had somebody I didn't know join the group. And after one session, I knew that this was not going to work. I was like, crap. I didn't think I needed to say something earlier, but I should have. He's playing this. He didn't roll him up that way, but it was pretty much a chaotic evil thief who was stealing everything from the party and trying to backstab everybody. And I've got a party of lawful good adventurers out to save the kingdom, and
was the potato's name Spuds McKenzie?
Yeah. I totally forget. This is like 20 some years ago. Might have been.
I'm pretty sure
that's his name now.
But I think that's a good point. That it's like experienced players, you can get away with not having a session zero, right? You can really do it. Inexperienced players, you kind of want to do that. And like I sat down with each of my kids and some of their friends. I'm actually getting some of their friends in on the action now too. And said, okay, let's you and I sit down together and roll up your character because you've never rolled one up before. I don't want to just be like, okay, here's 300 pages of book to go figure it out, right? So it's like, okay, how do you want to play your character? Do you want to be a magic user? Do you want to be an archer? Do you want to be, what do you really want to be? And what fits your personality type? Because I think for a one-off of somebody playing their first character, they have to kind of see what fits them so they can kind of get into the game more. Because some people want to be a tank. Some people want to be the mage with the fireball and not care what size the room is, right? And some people want to be the thief. Some people want to be the cleric. It just kind of depends. But I think that session zero can matter, especially for inexperienced players.
Are you guys all following Mike Merles on X? If you're not, you should be, and anybody else who's watching this stream should, because holy cow, there's a guy who has been handcuffed by his employer for many years, and it's like now that he's not working for WotC anymore, he's just his Twitter is a refreshing stream of this is what I like, this is what I don't like. What do you guys think? You know,
I have never met a man so angry about bonus actions in my life until I met Mike Merles.
Yeah, how do you? What's
this idea? And it got away from him. And
so somebody put his Twitter handle in the chat so everybody can see it. Because I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. I've got
M Merles, I believe. Memmearls, I think.
Oh, sorry, one more time.
Memmearls, I believe.
Mike Merles, game design. Look at that. I am actually not following him, so I will put a link to him.
You'll like that. He ever since he left.
But Dano, you made a good point there, and it was something I didn't think about till years later too. Was for most of my gaming, I played with old friends that I knew, and there was a lot of stuff that was just already, we'd either just always chat about it, or we'd talk about the next game's going to be like this, and we're hanging out, and all that stuff. When I got to Wizards, I often had people like I even had people come to me at like 3 p.m, and they're like, I have some friends visiting. Can you DM a game for us tonight? Right. I'd be like, tonight? And I'd be like, okay, and I'd literally just be like, okay. And I try to throw together like some sort of one shot, something fun. But it was that kind of thing. It wasn't really a session 0, but I knew at the front of that game, I had to say, here's kind of what this is going to be about. Here's what it's going to be like, and sort of set your expectations, and sort of be like, here's what we're doing. This is going to be spooky, or this is going to be this or that. And you set down the stuff, and then you go bang, and it kind of goes. But yeah, beforehand, when it was just like, when you're used to just the same group of friends and stuff, the session 0 thing seems kind of alien.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, then it's okay. Who's bringing pizza, and I'll bring the liquor, right? It's
right. Yeah.
All of my session 0s anymore are just me, like all of the adventures I haven't gotten to run yet because we were doing one thing for months or years already, and my friends just have to talk me down from trying to combine them all. Like really, it's just an intervention for me. Yeah, like, hey guys, I just bought 400 more books this past week, and you guys want to run all of this? No, Will, we have to choose one. I'm like, oh, okay. What do you want to do?
Yep.
I also want to say, if you ever go to a convention like Gary Con or Game Hole or any of those, and Zeb Cook happens to be there, do what you can to go play a game at his table, because I feel like every time I played with that guy, it's a master class in DMing. He has a homebrew sequel to the Isle of Dread that I got to play in once. And when he does it, he has 16 players. 16 players at the same table. And I got to play in that. And I thought, this is going to be anarchy. And holy cow, it was so much fun. We were all part of a pirate crew. Everybody had a job. And for 4 hours, he wrangled 16 guys that never met each other to one of the most fun adventures I've ever had. I just had to throw that out there.
Well, and if you're really lucky, he'll wear his luchador shirt. Have you seen his luchador shirt?
No.
So he's got this sweet button-up shirt, right? It's like a button-up plaid shirt. And he's got 2 luchadors right here, right? These 2 luchador pants. It's the most beautiful shirt I have ever seen. Cook, if you are watching this right now, I want the name of your tailor. Sorry, I just want to toss that out too. What a great shirt.
More motivation for you to come to GaryCon, Tim.
I actually really kind of want to go. It's more of a kid schedule thing than a me schedule thing at this point. But yeah, if I come, I'll bring you. Everybody tell me what your favorite liquor is. I'll find a way to bring some of it.
Free.
Free? Okay.
Free.
Mine's coffee. Smuggler's coffee.
I actually was talking to Rob Kuntz on Twitter the other day.
Awesome too.
You guys know who Rob Kuntz is, right? So it's legend in the community. I was talking to him on Twitter the other day. He gets a little upset about some things, and it's kind of funny that he had somebody respond to him one day going, "I've been playing this game since you were in diapers." I'm like, "Yeah, that guarantee you have not been playing this game longer than him. There's no way." Right? And he has a memoir or something he's written that he hasn't published yet. And I'm like, dude, when that comes out, I will send you. I have 2 bottles of champagne I've been saving that are 1999 Dom Perignons. I'm sending him one of those too. If he'll publish that book, just because I want to read the freaking thing. So
Yeah.
Gary Con, I'll bring some nice wine or something. We'll have an interesting game as long as we're allowed to drink liquor there, which I assume we are. But anyway, so I'll try to make it this year. So that brings up a question. Since you guys are all DMs, or at least sort of forever DMs, I think a lot of times part of the problem people have is somebody said it to you, Richard, earlier about, people are looking for a table and they got a list of check boxes. Like, hey, I've got 6 things I look for in a table, and if you don't check all 6, I'm not playing, right?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes DMs get a little dictatorial in the way they want a game to go. It's like, I've built a game, you're going to do it how I want you to, whether or not that's what I want you to. And anytime I've ever played with a DM, I've had a couple that have been dictatorial that I didn't really ever want to play with again.
Mhm.
And then I've had some that are like, hey man, let's just see where it goes. Right. And those are the tables I really want to be at. I don't want to be at, I've got this rigidly structured game. And like one of the worst written modules ever, I actually bought it just because somebody said it was bad and I didn't believe how bad it was. It gets kind of like that. This particular one, it's more like a script than it is an actual adventure. So it kind of looks at it like, this is, sort of exactly what you do. And now you do this, and now you turn left, and now you see that, and now you turn right. And to me, a module is not supposed to be about that. It's supposed to be about sort of enjoying the space and having fun. So as you guys, as DMs, if you could give any advice to a DM, I'm going to leave this open. What would you want to see a good DM do? Since you guys are the forever DMs, what works well at your tables and what makes people have a good time?
Am I starting again?
Let's go
You
with
are.
you.
Sucker, you talk first. I was going to pretend to have mic issues.
You got all the snow on the ground, and Winston might get mad at you.
It's rainy, soggy snow now. Good snowballs though. Well, to your point, I think, like I said, there's the thing we've been talking about is, should you be able to do whatever you want, or should you be very dictatorial? And to me, it's like those are both the extremes, and that's often where people sort of argue points on those ends. But what I found is, if you're going to DM stuff, you're always like, if you don't lay down some things, the game can just fly off and be totally weird. If you lay down too much, you get into stuff like railroading and things like that. So to me, the real answer is like, well, how do you do this, or what's the answer? And it's kind of like, well, it's part of the fun of DMing and running a game. You have to learn how to surf, right? Sometimes you lean this way, sometimes you lean that way, sometimes, but you're always trying to figure out, experiment, because honestly, I don't know what's going to be fun for the people at your table. You have to kind of figure it out. You have to figure out the gauge of that. So the best thing I would say is like, you got to try some stuff. You got to figure out what people want at your table. If they want it to be Wild West, we can do whatever. Great. Then that's, let her go. Or if they want, like I said, like we want to play a historically accurate something that's very strict on rules because we find that fun. I'm like, that's cool too. But it's kind of up to your group. So, and the DM has all of that to kind of take into account. And I'd say it's one of the hardest things. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite pieces of advice that I ever got or took to heart was actually in the Marvel superheroes players book. I think that, that Jeff Grubb RPG, and it was a drawing at Spider-Man, and he's in front of a chalkboard with like a graduation cap on, and he's pointing to a sign, and it says "No buffaloes," and then underneath it, it was, good GMs don't let players buffalo them. And I think that's just a great piece of advice. It kind of reinforces what Richard says. This is, you go in, know how you're going to run the game, or how you'd like it, how you want things to appear, and stick to it. Don't get bullied by the players, because I've seen that. I've seen some horrible examples where people would just complain to, I need this magic sword, I need whatever.
Well, to me, it's the rule lawyering that always gets me. It's like, well, on page 74, paragraph 3, you can clear. I'm like, I don't care.
Well, and that goes back to what Richard said too about setting those expectations. We're either going to we're going to play it as the the rules is written, or this is our house rules here.
Mm-hmm.
The
So
rules seem to change.
Know your material. I think that's my biggest thing. I like, like I remember playing. I got to play with Tim Kask once, and he had an adventure, and he never picked up or even opened a book. I was just awed. It was an OD&D game, and he just had his dice tower and his dice, and everything was up here. I could now, I'm not saying be like that because I'm not asking. I'll never be like that. But that was another cool experience.
So somebody asked me the other day what I wanted to do as I sail towards not working anymore, and oddly enough, it was do some work, because one of the things they came up with was I want to put an AI voice activated thing into my iPad that I can just ask it to pull up a rule and have it sort of know what it is I'm looking for and pull up the right page in the freaking manual for me, so that I don't have to go like, crap, where is that? Right. So it's just like, bam, there you go. It's like, so yeah, that's my little thing for my semi-retirement days. So this Effin GM, man, what's yours?
So just so we're clear, is it just?
I love your handle, dude. It's fantastic.
Thank you. It came from
this effing guy.
Yeah,
I lived in Boston a long time, man. It's like this freaking guy, It's just,
I did not. I lived in Kansas, but I have to steal things from Boston to seem relevant to people. So,
I keep getting right down the road.
So my question is, my question to your question is, are we saying advice in general, specifically advice on the spectrum that we're talking about here?
The spectrum that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I cut you off there. Yeah, I mean, I think like I kind of got like two. Here's the way I see it as. If you're playing at home versus when you're playing at a convention, these are two separate pieces. You have two separate rules to operate by. Right. When I run a game at a convention, I'm gonna say shoot for the fun. Right. Like it is less important to run the rules as written, as much as it's to ensure that all these people who paid for or are spending their valuable convention time with you, give them the time of their life, whatever way you can. If it turns out it's by following the rules, great. If it turns out it's not, you got to be willing to throw that away. But convention play is different from home play, right? With home play, I try to shoot for every session. I try to make sure that I go for the 80-20 split, right? I'm a corporate trainer. Our goal is not 100% of the people who come through our classes pass the class with flying colors and are experts. We're shooting for 80. Okay, we're hoping that 80% of the people who come through the classes feel super confident about it, because we're constantly having to churn through people. When we create content, we have so many different departments. We create content for the 80% and then let the internal department deal with the other 20% that we can't. I don't know if I'm making sense here. What I'm trying to say here is that every session I try to make sure 80% of the people at my table are having a good time. That's what I'm shooting for. I can't be expected to be perfect, just like my players can't be expected to be perfect. And then every time I know, if I notice that I unfortunately missed 20% of my players and they didn't have as much of a good time, then I make sure when I come back to the table next time, I'm going to make darn certain that person who got left out of the fun, gets some spotlight on them, so they're definitely included in that 80. It's like Richard said, you're pulling. He's left leaning, right? I'm saying I'm pulling levers, left and right. You got to be flexible. You have to be flexible, but don't hold yourself to a standard that nobody can succeed at, and don't hold your players to that same standard either, right? Sometimes they may have an off night, just like you're allowed to have an off night. Sometimes maybe the game isn't working. Maybe they aren't working for this game. And, maybe before you kick them out, ask yourself real fast, hey, is it this player's not working with this game, but would we rather play with this person or would we rather play this game? Because we can always just change, throw it out. Be flexible. Be flexible. Don't worry about being perfect. And, make sure your sentences come to an end at some point. I'm so sorry. That's so much rambling. I'm so sorry.
I can hear the corporate trainer in your voice now. Hey, I have an uncle who's a history professor, and if you ask him a history question, he could talk for exactly 45 minutes and leave 5 minutes for question and answer on just about anything.
Well, that to me is a good point too, which is why you think about like how you run, say, Kender in a game, or if you have evil characters in a game, or things like that, because you're talking about you really hope 80% of the players or more are having fun. There's a potential with some of those things where one player has fun and everybody else gets really frustrated.
And that's not a good game.
Yeah,
I don't do evil campaigns anymore. Just
me neither.
My world, and it's just not fun. We want to be the guys I game with. We want to be heroes for a weekend.
Yeah,
He says that, but he literally stabbed me the first time we met. Oh, sorry, you said campaigns. I thought you just meant evil in general. My bad, Yodana.
Air Force guys don't stab you. That's what officers are for.
Yeah.
I am convinced. I'll leave everybody with this thought, and I think we should probably call it a night.
Before we call it a night, Richard, can we get to say goodnight to Winston?
Yeah,
I think so.
this is the only reason I came on this show was to see Winston.
Let me get him.
I'm supposed to also
I don't want to leave without
Winston.
saying good. I don't want to.
There he is.
There's the boy.
Did you wake him up?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's like, why'd you wake me up, man?
He's like, why? Why?
Winston?
It's like my human knows better.
Okay, he's going back to the.
Thanks, Richard.
Bye, buddy.
All right. So I want to thank you guys for coming on, because this is a fun topic area for me with the Kender versus Tieflings. I think all good thing. I think they can be played well. I think a lot of the complaints people have is a table problem or a player problem. It's not really a character or a race problem. It's something else. So I think they can be played right, and they can be played poorly too. But you can say the same thing about magic users or clerics or anything else. You can play them right, you can play them badly. So I think part of it is just on how to get those things done well. And remember, the idea is to have fun.
This has been a fun group of people to hang out with for an hour and talk D&D. I had a blast.
All right, we should do this again, man.
I would.
Yeah.
2 for 2 with Dano.
Have to do it. Yeah, I don't. Like I said, I think I've streamed with anyone before. I finally got over my stage fright there.
I think you did a fantastic job, dude.
You get used to it. You just don't think about how many people are watching.
It's great.
My
topics. I couldn't not join in on the Kender fun.
This will make you feel better, because this is okay. I got over my fear. I used to have sort of I don't really want to go talk in front of people thing. When I was a grad student, I wrote this paper on this thing called the Riemann-Zeta hypothesis. I will leave out all of the math of this because it's math that nobody but me and like 12 other guys care about. And I was invited to go give a talk at Princeton. So I flew up to Princeton and I gave this talk because I was about to graduate. I was looking for a postdoc job anyway. And I was trying to debate, should I go more experimental or theoretical? Because I'm a physicist, and that's always the discussion. But everybody wants to be theoretical because those are the cool guys. That's Einstein. That's Dirac. Those are the ones. And I was like, I'm really kind of leaning towards that, but I wanted to think about experimental. So I go to Princeton, and John Nash was still alive at the time, the guy from the movie A Beautiful Mind, but the real one. And he worked at Princeton. And I get in there to give my talk, and he's sitting in the front row, and I'm like, oh, mother of God. What have I done? Because it's a field he works in, right? And he's sitting next to him is another famous guy and another famous guy and another famous guy. And I get to the end of my talk, and all 4 of them raise their hand with questions. And I'm like, holy mother of shit. What do I do? So, of course, I call on anybody else in the room but those 4 guys, right? So until time runs out, because I'm a sissy. And I get to the end of it, and John Nash comes up to me and talks to me and goes, so you really want to pursue this for a living? And I was like, I think so. He goes, let me ask you a question. Riemann-Zeta hypothesis is cool. I've worked on it. Lots of people have. You've got an interesting approach. And since 1960, sort of 15 people have taken this seriously. If you go all the way back to 1940, maybe you get to 20. It's like, okay. He goes, 13 of us have been institutionalized. Are you sure? I was like, not anymore. I was like, I'm going experimental, man. I switched. So don't worry about your fear. It could always be worse. We could have Margaret Weiss on the panel with you, and she could be talking about it.
Actually, I have a big surprise for you guys. Hold on a second.
So it could be worse, man. It's not that bad. This is a bunch of people that talk the same language.
Good time.
Right.
Dano, all I gotta say is I would cast you as Sturm in the movie.
Oh, thank you. That would be my. Anytime I get the chance, especially at the conventions, I always play my paladins. I had so much fun.
Yeah, I we put you a stern, man. You're gonna die. I hope you know that. But
Yeah. Hey, that's a blaze of glory.
It's
that
glorious.
yeah. But sorry if I ruined that for anybody. Sturm does die.
No,
There's a funny.
Margaret Weiss just said that there's no such thing as spoilers after 40 years. You know.
Yeah. Well, it was,
So we can finally talk about how he went to the moon.
okay, that particular one was like, what the hell is this? I enjoyed the book, but I'll tell you.
Okay, I don't want to keep us here, but Bookmaster Cycle, it's a 5-book series. It's a Spelljammer Dragonlance crossover. You laugh, but a Kender does go
okay,
doing a little bit of that crossover.
You got to send me that one in a DM because I don't think I have this.
I will.
But I will tell you that the only book in the Dragonlance world I've been completely let down by, and there aren't many. Some of them are just okay, and I read them anyway. But the one that really let me down is that one.
Yep.
I did not like that one. I expected much more out of that book.
In my mind, Brothers in Arms like completely replaced that as like, oh, okay, oh, that's why they wrote this book to make up for that.
Yeah, I that particular one I was like, I really expected more, but it was just me. So all right, thank you guys for coming on. Everybody have a great night. Don't forget, everybody here has Twitter accounts and 2 of us have YouTube accounts, so click subscribe and follow and all that kind of fun stuff. We're always around.
Yep.
And my DMs are always open. If you want to know what these guys' handles are, just shoot me a DM anywhere and I will answer you eventually. It may not be right away.
Yo Dano.
Yo Dano, you're easy to find. Just search Dragonlance. He'll be the top 20 hits. That's just the way it's gonna work. So everybody have a great night.
Have a good one.
Yeah,
Take
you
care.
too. Have a good one.
Ending